The black refuse bags were still warm from the sun when Wendy Benson carried them down the staircase herself. Nobody helped her. Not the neighbor who watched from a cracked door. Not the security man who looked away the moment she caught his eyes. Not the woman standing at the bottom of the staircase in a yellow dress, one hand resting on the gate like she already owned the place. Which, in a way, she now did. Wendy did not cry. That was the part people later found impossible to believe. She had cried so many times inside that apartment, pressed against the cold bathroom tiles at 2 a.m, that she believed she had finally exhausted the supply. There were no tears left. Only a strange, hollow silence that sat in her chest like a stone beneath still water. Andre had said it with his jacket already on. He had not even put down his phone. "Wendy, I have been patient. I have tried. But ever since I married you, nothing has worked for me. You are my bad luck. Any man who wants to move forward in this life cannot carry dead weight. I am done. Dead weight." She had stood in the kitchen doorway holding a plate of rice she had just finished cooking for him. The plate was still in her hands when he walked past her without looking, opened the front door, and let Imani Adeola step inside, as though they were exchanging positions in a relay race. Wendy set the plate down carefully on the kitchen counter. She did not throw it. She did not scream. She walked to the bedroom, pulled her suitcase from under the bed, and began to pack. What Andre did not know, what he could not have known, was that 48 hours earlier, Wendy had sat at the head of a polished mahogany table in a Victoria Island boardroom and signed a 47 million naira housing development contract with a mid-scale construction firm called Benson and Build. The contractor's name on the file had read, Andre Benson. She had smiled when she saw it. She had planned to surprise him that weekend over dinner. She never got to the dinner. She never got to the surprise. What she got instead were black refuse bags, a woman in a yellow dress, and a husband who did not even wait for the door to close behind her before he started laughing. This is the story of what silence carries, and what it releases when it finally breaks. Before we continue, let me ask you something quietly.
Where are you listening from right now?
And what time is it in your part of the world? Some of us are hearing this story under the hot afternoon sun. Some in the calm of the night, when thoughts are heavy and hearts are open. Different places, one story, one lesson. If stories like this speak to your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your like helps this story reach another soul. Your comment tells me you understand the lesson. And when you share, you may be saving someone from the same mistake. Now, let us continue. Wendy Benson had not always been quiet. Those who knew her before Lagos, before the marriage, before Andre, would describe a woman who filled every room she entered with a particular kind of energy. Not loudness. Presence. The kind that made people lean forward slightly without realizing they were doing it. She had grown up in Benin City as the second of 4 children, raised by a schoolteacher mother who told her daughters every single morning, "Your intelligence is not a threat to anyone worth keeping." Wendy had carried those words like a compass through university, through her early career, through every room that tried to make her feel too large for it. She had graduated top of her business administration class at the University of Benin. Not second. Not joint first. First, alone, cleanly, by a margin that made her professors quote her in lectures for 2 years after she left. She had moved to Lagos at 26 with a single suitcase, a contact number at a real estate firm in Victoria Island, and the unshakable conviction that she was going somewhere significant. She had been right. She met Andre Benson at a property exhibition in Abuja when she was 29. He was stationed beside a display board for his construction firm, Benson and Build, wearing a smile that arrived 3 seconds before everything else about him. He was charming in the way that men who have not yet been tested often are: easy, warm, generous with attention. He told her he was building something real. She believed him, partly because it was true and partly because she was also building something real, and she had made the honest mistake of confusing shared ambition for shared character. They dated for 14 months. He was attentive in that period, present, curious about her work, proud of her in the uncomplicated way that feels like love before the weight of life arrives to test whether it actually is. They married in a modest, Joyful ceremony in Suralere. Mama Ola had cooked for 2 full days. Benjamin, Andre's younger brother, had danced until the sole of his left shoe separated from the upper. It had been, by every measure, a good day. The marriage became something else entirely in the second year. Benson and Bild had stalled on 2 consecutive government contracts that collapsed due to political reshuffling, a Lego story as old as the city itself, and one that had broken better-prepared men than Andre. The money slowed. The pipeline dried. And rather than turning inward to examine the structural weaknesses in his business approach, Andre turned outward, scanning his life for an explanation that did not require him to look at himself directly. He found Wendy. Since you entered my life, I have not had one clean success. The first time he said it, she laughed nervously, the way people laugh at things that are too absurd to take seriously. The second time, she reasoned with him carefully, listing his wins, reminding him of the contracts he had completed, placing his failures within their proper context of industry-wide challenges. The third time, she went quiet. That was the year the silence began. She had been promoted to deputy director at Pinnacle Realty Group that same year, a promotion she had earned through 5 years of methodical, exceptional work. She had not announced it immediately at home. She had learned, gradually and painfully, to manage her own news carefully. Good things, released too directly, had a way of sharpening Andre's resentment rather than softening it. So she waited, calibrated her timing, and told him on a Sunday afternoon when he seemed settled. He had nodded and said, "At least one of us is moving." No congratulations. No embrace. Not even eye contact. Benjamin had called that evening, somehow, as he always did, at the exact right moment. "Congratulations, Wendy. You deserve every bit of it. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." He had emphasized anyone with a deliberateness that was not accidental and that Wendy understood completely. Mama Ola had visited the following weekend and offered a different kind of counsel. Standing beside Wendy at the kitchen sink, drying plates with the authority of a woman who considered her opinions a form of generosity, she had said, "You are doing well, Wendy, but be careful how much you shine at work. Men like Andre need to feel like the ceiling of the house, not the floor. Dim a little. It helps." Wendy had washed the same cup 3 times while Mama Ola spoke. She had said, "Yes, Ma," because she had not yet found the language to explain that a woman should never have to become a power cut so a man could feel like electricity. What none of them saw, what she barely admitted to herself in those months, was how thoroughly she had begun to disappear inside the marriage. Not physically. Every morning she rose, dressed with intention, drove to Victoria Island, and ran a department of 60 staff members with a kind of focused authority that made colleagues take notes when she spoke. She was formidable in every professional space she occupied. But she came home and shrank. She turned the volume down on herself the way you adjust a radio for someone who finds the music too loud, gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize you can barely hear the song anymore. Dr. Sarah Akinlai, her closest friend and physician of 8 years, had flagged it plainly during a routine checkup. "Wendy, I need you to hear me clearly. Chronic emotional suppression has physical consequences. I am seeing the evidence in your results. Whatever you are holding at home, your body is holding it with you." Wendy had promised to address it. She had written it in her planner with the same discipline she applied to quarterly targets and board presentations. She had not addressed it. By the 3rd year, Andre's late nights had become a pattern too consistent to be explained by work alone. Wendy noticed. She chose, repeatedly, the interpretation that caused the least immediate pain, because some part of her still believed that patience was a form of love, and that love, applied consistently enough, could correct what was broken in a person. Then she found the earring between the sofa cushions, small, gold, shaped like a crescent. She placed it on the kitchen counter, without a word. Andre walked past it 3 times that evening. The 4th time, she watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He looked at her and said, "You are always searching for problems that are not there." She picked up the earring, dropped it in the bin, went to bed. The warning signs had never been subtle. They had simply been absorbed, by a woman who had been told, in 100 different ways by 100 different voices, that her role was to hold the structure together regardless of what it cost her. She was still holding it.
For now.
The contract arrived on a Tuesday. Wendy had been in back-to-back meetings since 7 in the morning, moving between a client presentation on the 3rd floor and a procurement review on the 5th, with the focused efficiency of someone who had long since stopped waiting for the day to slow down and simply learned to move faster than it did. By the time her assistant placed the final tender evaluation reports on her desk at 4:30, the Lego sun was already bleeding orange through the Victoria Island skyline, and Wendy was running on her 3rd cup of cold coffee and the particular discipline that women in her position develop not as a luxury, but as a survival requirement. Pinnacle Realty Group had spent 6 weeks reviewing contractors for a major residential housing development in the Aja corridor. 47 million naira. 40 units. An 18-month delivery window with phased payment tied strictly to verified milestones. It was one of the most significant internal projects Pinnacle had approved in 2 years, and Wendy had overseen the tender process personally, not because she distrusted her team, but because she understood that the decisions made at this stage would define the project's integrity from foundation to completion. 3 firms had survived the shortlist. Her procurement lead had prepared a comparative summary. The recommendation was clear and unanimous. Benson and Build had submitted the strongest technical proposal. Their site completion history was clean. Their pricing was competitive without being suspiciously low. Their projected timeline was realistic in a way that suggested genuine field experience, rather than a document assembled to win a bid. Wendy had read through the evaluation twice, found no credible objection to the recommendation, and reached for her pen. She had annealed the evaluation sheet before she turned to the final page of the company profile, the registered director information, appended as standard. Andre Benson. She had set her pen down slowly. For a moment she simply sat with it, the way you sit with something that is simultaneously surprising and, upon reflection, not surprising at all. Andre had been submitting tenders across Lagos for years. Pinnacle operated across the Lekki-Aja corridor. The overlap was not impossible. It had simply never happened before. Her first instinct, the clean, professional instinct, was to flag it immediately. Recuse herself. Hand the final approval to her deputy and document the conflict of interest formally. That was procedure. That was correct. But she sat with it a moment longer. The firm had won on merit. Her name appeared nowhere in Pinnacle's public-facing materials. She had always maintained a deliberate separation between her professional profile and her personal life, a boundary that had begun as preference and had quietly become protection. Andre had submitted this proposal without knowing she would ever see it. There had been no manipulation, no lobbying, no phone call asking her to favor him. He had simply competed and won. She made a decision rooted not in procedure, but in something older and more complicated than procedure. She would sign it, and on Saturday, over dinner, she would place a printed copy of the contract on the table beside a bottle of wine and say the words she had been quietly rehearsing in different forms for 3 years. Your wife believed in you before Lagos did. She had smiled thinking about it. A real smile, the kind that arrived without effort, the kind she had not felt in that office in connection with her marriage for a very long time. She had called Dr. Sarah that evening on the drive home. Sarah, I think something might actually shift between us. He won a real contract, a big one, and I was the one holding the pen. He does not know that yet. I want to tell him properly. I think it could change things. Sarah had been quiet for a moment before she said, I hope you are right, Wendy. Just make sure you are reading the situation and not the situation you wish existed. Wendy had told her she understood. She had not fully heard her. Andre received the contract confirmation on Thursday morning by email, followed by a formal letter delivered to his site office in Aja by midday. Wendy knew the timeline. She had approved the dispatch. She imagined him reading it. She imagined the particular relief that arrives when something you have fought for finally lands. She had felt that relief herself enough times to recognize its shape, and for one generous moment, she felt it on his behalf. He called his site supervisor first, then his accountant, then Mama Ola, who reportedly wept briefly and said, God has answered. Then, In a call that lasted 22 minutes according to a phone bill Wendy would never see, he called Imani Adeola. He did not call Wendy. She did not know this until later. On Thursday evening, she came home to find him in good spirits for the first time in months, loose, expansive, the way he used to be before the failures accumulated and calcified into resentment. She had felt a cautious hope stirring.
She had thought, Saturday.
Hold it for Saturday. But she lay awake that night listening to him breathe beside her, and something underneath the hope was pulling at her attention, quiet and persistent, like a thread caught on something sharp. She could not name it precisely. She only knew that the warmth he was carrying into the apartment did not feel like it had originated there. Friday arrived with the particular heaviness of days that have already been decided. Andre came home at 7 in the evening with his jacket on and his eyes already elsewhere. He moved through the apartment with a kind of deliberate efficiency that Wendy recognized immediately as rehearsed, the efficiency of a man executing a plan he had finalized before he walked through the door. He did not sit down. He did not eat. He stood in the center of the living room and delivered his speech with the flat, organized calm of someone who had made peace with what they were about to do long before the moment arrived. Dead weight. Bad luck.
Done.
Wendy stood in the kitchen doorway holding a plate of rice she had just finished cooking. She heard every word with the strange clarity that extreme shock sometimes produces, each sentence arriving fully formed, sitting in the air between them with awful precision. She set the plate down on the kitchen counter. She did not throw it. She did not raise her voice. She walked to the bedroom and began to pack. Imani Adeola arrived at the gate 12 minutes later in a yellow dress, stepping out of a taxi with the ease of someone arriving at a place they had already furnished in their imagination. The security man opened the gate without question. Andre had clearly given instruction. Benjamin had tried to call Andre 3 times that afternoon. Andre had not answered. Mama Ola had known since the previous evening. She had not called Wendy. That silence, deliberate, chosen, wrapped in the language of family loyalty, would prove to be its own kind of betrayal. Not louder than Andre's, but in some ways, because it came from a woman Wendy had served and loved and called mother for 3 years, it cut in a place that Andre's cruelty had not quite reached. Wendy carried her bags down the staircase one by one. She ordered a ride. She did not look back. And somewhere on the expressway between Lekki and Ikoyi, with 2 refuse bags pressing against her leg and Lagos moving past the window in a blur of light and noise, she opened her phone and typed a message to her legal team lead. Please pull the Benson and build file. I need to review the conflict of interest provisions first thing Monday morning.
She sent it, put the phone face down on her lap, closed her eyes.
The Saturday dinner she had planned would never happen. The wine would never be opened. The words she had rehearsed, your wife believed in you before Lagos did, would never be spoken. But Monday was coming. And Wendy Ade Benson had never once missed a Monday. Monday arrived the way consequences always do, ordinary on the surface, irreversible underneath. Wendy had spent the weekend at Dr. Sarah's home in Ikoyi. She had slept more than she expected to. She had eaten. She had sat on Sarah's balcony on Sunday morning with a cup of tea and said almost nothing for 2 hours while Sarah read beside her, respecting the silence the way only someone who truly understood grief could. On Sunday evening, Sarah had said gently, "You do not have to do anything you are not sure of, Wendy." Wendy had looked at her cup and said, "I am completely sure." She arrived at the Pinnacle Realty Group offices at 7:45 Monday morning, 45 minutes before her first scheduled meeting. Her legal team lead, a precise and unshakable woman named Grace Olu, was already at her desk. Wendy closed the office door. She laid out the sequence clearly: the contract approval, her marital relationship to the register director, the failure to formally recuse herself from the final sign-off, and the personal circumstances that had since arisen which created an irreparable conflict of integrity, not merely of interest. Grace Olu listened without interrupting. Then she said, "On the grounds you have described, termination is legally clean. The conflict of interest clause in Section 9 of the tender agreement covers this precisely. Benson and Build has received no mobilization funds yet. No work has commenced. Termination at this stage carries no financial liability to Pinnacle. Wendy nodded. Prepare the notice. Wendy. Grace paused. Once this goes, it goes. A firm terminated at this stage for conflict of interest grounds goes into our procurement register. Other developers in this network share that register. I know what I am doing, Grace. The termination notice was prepared, reviewed, signed, and dispatched by 10:15 that morning. Andre received it at 11:47. He had been at a site in Aja with his supervisor, walking the land he had already mentally divided into 40 units, already calculating the first phase payment, already rehearsing the speech he would give Imani over dinner about a future that finally looked the way he had always said it would.
His phone rang.
It was his accountant. The call lasted 4 minutes. Andre did not speak for most of it. When he hung up, his supervisor asked, Oga, we day move? Andre stood on the red Lego soil and said nothing. The letter was formal.
Precise.
It cited Section 9, Clause 4 of the tender agreement, undisclosed conflict of interest between the approving officer and the registered contractor director. It stated that Pinnacle Realty Group was withdrawing the contract effective immediately, that no financial obligations had been incurred, and that Benson and Build's name had been entered into the Pinnacle Procurement Integrity Register pending a 30-day review period. He read it 3 times. And then, slowly, the full architecture of what he had done began to assemble itself in front of him. Pinnacle Realty Group. He had never once connected those words to his wife. Wendy worked in real estate, he knew that. She was senior. He knew that too in the vague, uninterested way that men who do not truly see their wives absorb information about them. But Pinnacle, the firm that had just handed him the biggest contract of his career and taken it back in the same breath. He called the main office number. The receptionist confirmed that the CEO of Pinnacle Realty Group was a Mrs. Wendy Ade Benson. He sat down on the red soil of the Aja site and did not get up for a long time. Benjamin called him that afternoon. He already knew. Wendy had called him not to gloat, but simply to say she was all right. Benjamin had listened, and then he had cried quietly in his car before calling his brother. You threw away the woman who was holding the door open for you, Benjamin said. And you did it the same weekend. She was planning to hand you the key. Andre said nothing. She did not sabotage you, Andre. You were already the one burning everything down. She just stopped standing in the fire with you. The line went silent for a long time. Then Andre said, in a voice Benjamin had never heard from him, thin and hollow and genuinely lost, I did not know. That, Benjamin said slowly, is the most honest thing you have said in 3 years. The news moved through Suralere the way Lagos gossip always does, fast, embellished, and completely merciless. By Wednesday, Mama Ola's neighbors knew the outline. By Thursday, the extended family WhatsApp group had fractured into 2 loud and irreconcilable camps. By Friday, Andre's uncle, the same man who had pressed his hands over both of theirs at the wedding and called it a blessed union, had called to say he was deeply ashamed of what the Benson name was being associated with. Andre had moved Imani into the Lekki apartment as planned. But the apartment felt different now in a way he could not immediately name. The furniture had not changed. The lighting had not changed. The view from the window was the same Lego skyline it had always been. But a quality had left the space, something that had nothing to do with decoration or arrangement, and everything to do with the specific presence of the person who had last made it feel inhabited. Imani filled the rooms with noise and color and movement, but the silence underneath all of it was louder than anything she brought. Andre stopped sleeping properly. His site supervisor called daily with updates that had nowhere to go, workers who could not be paid, equipment deposits already made and unrecoverable, a project timeline that now pointed toward nothing. The financial exposure was precise and brutal. He had committed nearly 4 million naira in pre-mobilization costs against a contract that no longer existed. The bank that had been quietly preparing a working capital facility withdrew its interest within days of the procurement register flag appearing. No explanation was offered. None was needed. Imani lasted 3 weeks. She did not leave with drama or confrontation. She packed while Andre was at a site meeting that had no site attached to it anymore, folded her things with the same deliberate care she had used arriving, and left a short handwritten note on the kitchen counter. Andre read it standing up. He read it twice. Then he set it down in almost the precise spot where Wendy had once placed a gold crescent earring, and understood, with the full weight of a man who has finally stopped lying to himself, exactly what that meant. Mama Ola came to see him the following weekend. She had aged in the concentrated way that guilt ages people, not gradually but in sudden visible increments, as though the body processes moral reckoning the same way it processes a sustained illness. She sat across from Andre in the Lecky apartment, and for the first time in his memory, she did not arrive with a defense prepared or an explanation ready. She simply sat. Her hands, which were never still, were folded quietly in her lap. She said, "I knew about Imani before Wendy did. I chose silence because I was protecting your name. But I have been sitting with what that silence cost that woman, and I cannot make peace with it." Andre looked at his mother for a long time. "Did you know who Wendy was professionally? Did you know about Pinnacle?" "No," Mama Ola said quietly. "But I knew who Wendy was as a person. And I still told her to make herself smaller, so you could feel larger. That is what I am most ashamed of." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to him. Benjamin visited Wendy twice that month. The second visit, he brought a small peace lily in a terracotta pot and said simply, "I want you to know that not everyone in that family looked away from you." Wendy received it with both hands and said, "I always knew that, Benjamin. That was never in question." What nobody fully saw was the grief Wendy carried beneath the composure, not grief for Andre specifically, but grief for the version of herself that had spent 3 years believing that patience and love were the same thing. They were not the same thing. She was only now learning the difference. 3 months after the termination notice was dispatched from the Pinnacle Realty Group offices on a Monday morning, Benson and Build formally ceased to exist. Andre filed the dissolution paperwork himself on a gray Tuesday, taking a danfo from Suralere to the business registration office on Lagos Island because the fuel in his car had run low and he had calculated, with a particular precision that broke men develop around money, that he could not justify the expense of filling the tank for a journey that carried no return. He sat in a plastic chair in a fluorescent-lit government office and waited for his number to be called with the same patience he had never once extended to his wife. When the clerk placed the form in front of him, he signed it without ceremony. The pen scratched across the page. The company that had been his identity, his argument against every person who had doubted him, his proof that he was building something real, ended in a signature that took less than 3 seconds. He rode the danfo back to Suralere and did not speak to anyone for the rest of the day. The Lecky apartment lease expired 2 weeks later. He had known it was coming. He had run the numbers repeatedly, searching for an arrangement that would allow him to stay, and the numbers had refused to cooperate. He packed his remaining belongings, fewer than he expected, which was its own quiet revelation, into the back of a borrowed truck and moved back into the room he had grown up in at Mama Ola's Suralere compound. The room was exactly as he remembered it. Same louvers. Same ceiling water stains shaped vaguely, like a map of something. Same narrow bed. He sat on the edge of it the first night and looked at the wall and understood that he had traveled an enormous distance to return to the exact place he had started, carrying considerably less than he had left with. Mama Ola said nothing about it. She made his food. She washed his clothes when he left them. She prayed in the early mornings in a low voice that filtered through the compound walls, and in her prayers Andre heard something he had never noticed in them before. A wait, a specific asking, the sound of a woman negotiating with God over consequences she understood, she had helped create. Benjamin came every week without announcement. He never asked how Andre was managing with the tone that expected a performance of recovery. He simply arrived, sat, talked about ordinary things when ordinary things were available, and waited in the spaces between sentences for whatever his brother actually needed to say. It was during one of these quiet Thursday evenings, sitting on the compound veranda with 2 bottles of malt between them, and the Suralere night carrying its familiar sounds around them, that Andre finally said it. "I never really saw her, Benjamin. 3 years. I looked at her every single day, and I never actually saw her." Benjamin did not rush to fill the silence that followed. She was never my bad luck, Andre continued. His voice had none of its old architecture. No defensiveness, no performance, no borrowed confidence. Just a man sitting with the truth of himself in the dark. I was looking for something to blame, and she was the closest thing to me. That is all it ever was. I know, Benjamin said. Is she all right? Benjamin looked at his bottle for a moment before answering. She keynoted a real estate summit in Abuja last month. Pinnacle just closed 2 new development contracts. She cut her hair. He paused. She looks like someone who put down something very heavy and found out she could run. Andre absorbed this slowly. She deserves that. Yes, Benjamin said. She always did. The compound was quiet around them. Somewhere down the street, a generator kicked on. A neighbor's television came faintly through a window. Lagos continuing its indifferent, relentless living. Andre picked up his malt bottle, held it without drinking. I had everything, he said quietly. I had everything and I called it dead weight. Benjamin did not respond. There was nothing to add. The words had finally arrived at the precise size of the loss they were describing, and both men sat with that for a long time in the surreal dark. Wendy Ade Benson did not return to the marriage. She had made that decision in the back of a ride-hail car somewhere between Lekki and Ikoyi with 2 refuse bags pressing against her leg and Lagos blurring past the window, and it had not moved once in the months that followed. She consulted her lawyer in the first week. The process was handled quietly, without public performance, without the spectacle of suffering that Lagos sometimes expects from women who have been wronged. She took her name back fully, in every professional document, every introduction, every room she entered. Benjamin's piece Lily lived on her office windowsill in Victoria Island, its white bloom open toward the light. She watered it every Monday morning before her first meeting, a small private ritual that meant something she had not fully put into words, but understood completely. She called her mother in Benin City more regularly now. Their conversations ran long, the kind of long that only happens when 2 people are making up for years of abbreviated connection. Her mother had said on one call, with the directness of a woman who had always told her daughters the truth, "You sound like yourself again, Wendy. You sound like the girl who used to argue everybody down at the dinner table." Wendy had laughed from her stomach, unguarded. The way she used to before Lagos and marriage and years of turning herself down had made her careful about how much sound she made. The Aja housing development contract was eventually awarded through a fresh tender process to a different firm. The project completed on schedule. 40 families received keys. The development was photographed for a Lagos property magazine, and Wendy's name appeared in the article as the executive who had insisted on retendering rather than cutting corners on the selection process. Andres saw the article. He did not know he would, but a cousin forwarded it to the family WhatsApp group without context, and his phone buzzed with it on a Wednesday morning while he was drinking tea in Mama Ola's compound kitchen. He read it fully. He looked at Wendy's name in print, the executive credit, the quiet authority of it, the way it sat on the page with the settled permanence of someone who had always been exactly who they were, and he placed his phone face down on the kitchen table. Mama Ola watched him from across the kitchen but said nothing. He finished his tea, rinsed the cup, placed it carefully on the drying rack, and walked out into the surreal morning to begin, slowly and without ceremony, the long work of becoming someone worthy of the life he had once held and did not know how to keep. There is a particular cruelty in the way some people treat silence as surrender. Wendy Ade Benson was never passive. She was patient, and there is a profound difference. Patience is active. It chooses. It endures with intention. But even patience has a boundary, and when Andre crossed it, he did not find a weak woman on the other side. He found the CEO. Andre's story is not simply a story about a man who lost a contract. It is the story of a man who was so consumed by what he believed his wife was costing him that he never once stopped to see what she was quietly building for him. He called her dead weight, while she was the very architecture, holding the ceiling up. Mama Ola's complicity is its own warning. When the women around struggling marriages protect reputation over truth, they do not protect the marriage. They protect the rot inside it. And Imani, who arrived in a yellow dress like a prize, left a note on a kitchen counter. Because people who come for what you appear to have cannot stay for what you actually are. The most devastating consequence Andre faced was not financial. It was the Thursday evening in his childhood bedroom when he finally said the words, "She was never my bad luck." Because those words came too late to mean anything to the person who needed to hear them.
And he knew it.
And he said them anyway. Because the truth does not wait for the right moment. It simply arrives, often long after the damage is permanent. Lagos will always give you another deal. It will not give you back the person you discarded on the way to one. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Comment your thoughts on the betrayal and tell me where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think happens next? Comment below.